What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another video on my channel. Today we're talking about your learning journey if you are aspiring to become a pro level Spark developer. Now, having a goal like that may be a daunting task because we can easily get overwhelmed or feeling frustrated by all the information that we receive. So there is a lot of documentation. The framework itself is very complex. There are many tutorials which are overly simplistic, and everyone tries to tell us what to do. Therefore, I have created a roadmap which you can follow. So I will just suggest you some steps that you can do on your path to mastery. And if you would like to receive more information on that, I have set up a mailing list where I will send you one email per week. And over the next weeks, I will send you 6 emails describing each of the 6 steps we're going to see here in more detail, alongside some helpful resources and some examples that you can do. So that would be worth considering to sign up for the mailing list. You will find the link in the show notes. Also, I provide individual coaching, so one-on-one coaching, where I teach you all of that is contained in these 6 steps as well in individual coaching sessions. So that would be the fast track learning for you, as you will get direct guiding by me. And you can check this out at academy.philipp-brunenberg.de, and you can find that link in the show notes as well. All right. In the first part, which we can see in the top left corner here, we try to learn Apache Spark SQL. So that means we set up a development environment where we can basically write our code. So for Python, that might be Databricks as a very simple version, because you don't have to set up everything. For Scala as well, but you can also use your favorite IDE and set up the dependencies and so on in your local IDE and run your Spark applications locally. And once we have that set up, we develop our first application. And subsequently, we would like to get some example data that we can work with. Now, in this first block here, we don't need huge amounts of data. One file would be fine. A couple of thousand lines of data, for example, would be sufficient to get familiar with the SQL API. And then in this block, we also would like to familiarize ourselves with the official documentation so that we can find the reliable information easily, for which the best source is of course the official documentation. So we would like to familiarize ourselves with that as well. And then we can start to build a small project on our own using the Spark SQL API. And therefore we know how to implement Apache Spark applications. All right, subsequently, there's part 2, which is down the road here. So once we're complete here, we would head over to part 2 to study some internals. And here we would like to understand how is parallelism achieved, what's the high-level architecture, what's a worker, a driver, an executor, the master, and so on. But also we would like to dive into deep into the MapReduce paradigm, which is basically the parallelism, the mechanism of parallelism in Spark. So it's based on this paradigm. And we would also like to explore what RDDs are, which are part of Spark Core, and then move over to Spark SQL, which introduces data frames and data sets, and also the catalyst and various optimizations. So that's what we would do in the part 2, study the internals. And here I can recommend you to go to YouTube or find some blog posts where you can read about what's happening inside, or how is Spark actually implemented, what are the core concepts. That's what we are trying to understand here. So, and all of that knowledge we will use also in the next parts. So that's why the order of these parts is actually important. All right, once we have a grasp of the internals and understand them well, we can head over to part 3, which is real world Spark. And here we are aiming to get familiar with the processes we use in real world Spark applications. So for example, we would like to deploy our application to a cluster. We would like to deliver configuration. We would like to get familiar with the most essential configuration parameters that exist. And also we would like to run applications on a cluster and monitor them on a cluster. So that's what we would do in part 3. And because that will be required by you if you are working in a professional project. There you don't develop applications locally on your laptop, but rather you have to deploy them into a cloud environment, for example. All right, then part 4 would be performance optimizations, and that's usually what many people are struggling with. But I would argue it's quite simple to optimize the performance if you got parts 1 and parts 2 correctly, and also part 3, because you would like to monitor. Because if you're working on the performance optimizations, you will have to understand the internals, and you will have to understand how to monitor and deploy your application on large data sets. And once we have that understanding, the performance optimization becomes quite simple, and we have to get familiar with the most common performance bottlenecks or issues that exist, which are not so many. And once we understand them, we can find these patterns in the monitoring of our running application. And here, I put detect and mitigate common performance issues, which comes down to knowing these patterns and being able to detect them in the monitoring. Here, I would also suggest you to look into the AQE, Adaptive Query Execution, and the memory management, which is actually happening on the executors. All right, through this forest up here to part 5, integrate Spark. So here I would recommend that you integrate Spark with some other technologies of the big data ecosystem. So that comes down basically to load or write data from or to different data sources, for example, HBase or HDFS or a relational database or S3, whatever. So any data storage technologies that you would like to integrate your Spark application in, because if you are working in a professional project, there will be a particular tech stack and you will have to integrate your application into that tech stack. Here I have also put deploying an application into the cloud, which basically means also integrating or running your application in a cloud environment. All right, and then there is this windy road down to part 6, which I would argue is actually the hardest part. Part 6, become pro. Now here we would like to understand what makes high quality Spark code and how can we structure our software so that it produces high quality code, and how can we assert that the functionality is correct. So here we will look into what makes high quality code, which traits does it have, and how can we write better code as Spark developers. And I would argue that this is the hardest part because it requires you to have the experience. So if you have worked with Spark for a couple of years, you have produced some errors and have debugged them and learned something along the way, probably. So that's where the experience comes in. And that's why it's quite hard to learn. I mean, you can learn from people who have the experience, who are trying to teach you these things. But in the end, you will have to build a lot of applications to gain the experience yourselves. And then finally, there's another point in this section, which is become fast, meaning become an efficient developer so that you can produce high quality code very fast. And that will be the final step of your journey to become a pro level Spark engineer. All right, I hope you found this video interesting. As I said before, I have set up a mailing sequence where for which you can sign up at newsletter.philipp-brunenberg.de, and there I will try to send you the most valuable information I have. I will try to keep these mails short, providing you with helpful resources and examples that you can use. Also, if you would like to accelerate your learning journey, you can check out my live one-on-one coachings. You can find these products on academy.philipp-brunenberg.de, and this is probably the fastest way of reaching your goal. All of these links you can also find in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in. I hope this was helpful for you. See you next time. Bye-bye.